is the chairman of the Northwest Shoshone Band. I will acknowledge that, according to Native Land Maps, it's a website, UUCO resides in the territory of the Eastern Shoshone, where Shoshone language is spoken and under agreements of the Fort Bridger Treaty. The Northwest Band is a member of the Eastern Shoshone. I want to acknowledge the greater concerns of Native people by reading a letter from the Native Congress of American Indians, to which the Eastern Shoshone belong. This is entitled to, or addressed to, Allies for Indian Country. The title is Learning about Tribal Native Nations, Citizenship, History, and Contemporary Issues. NCAI encourages our friends, relatives, and neighbors, whether native or not, to learn about the often shameful history of the United States dealings with tribal nations and the issues that are important to contemporary Native peoples. We also urge anyone who wants to be an ally to Native peoples to refrain from disparaging Native identity, weaponizing tribal citizenship, mocking Native cultures and religious traditions, or invoking painful aspects of our shared history for partisan gain. Tribal governments care deeply about the health, welfare, and prosperity of their citizens. We are the survivors of attempted genocide. And while we are the first Americans, our continued invisibility is dehumanizing. Last year, the results of the largest public opinion poll ever conducted by and about Native people, Reclaiming Native Truth, found that the majority of Americans know little or nothing about us. Some people don't even know that Native people still exist. And much of what Americans do know is rooted in the negative and distorting stereotypes perpetrated by popular culture, the media, offensive mascots, and our elected leaders. Indian country cares about infrastructure, treaty promises, climate change, violence against women, protecting our homelands, child welfare, voting rights, health care, and many other pressing issues that must be addressed to ensure the welfare of our people. NCAI invites anyone who wants to stand with Native peoples to learn about and help us achieve our goals, which are driven by the values and traditional knowledge that anchors our cultures, our respect for family, and our responsibility to care for our lands and our communities. Tips for those who want to be allies for Native people. Tribal nations are sovereign governments who enroll their own citizens, and while American Indians and Alaska Natives experience racist treatment and discrimination, we are not racial groups, but instead are considered a political class of people under federal law. It is always okay to explore your ancestry, but ancestry does not equate with citizenship in a tribal nation. Please work directly with a tribal nation if you think you're eligible to be enrolled as a citizen and are interested in assuming the obligations of citizenship. Every tribal government determines who is a citizen of their own nation, and each nation has varying criteria for citizenship. Further, some Native people may have been separated from their tribal nation during the many harmful federal policy eras that were aimed at forcing assimilation of Native people. The federal government told Native people that their languages, cultures, and religions were inferior or evil. We mourn the loss of these relatives. For this and other reasons, who is Native can be a sensitive subject within Indian country. Before the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978, 25 to 35% of all Native children were routinely taken from their home, and 85% of those removed children were placed outside of their communities and culture. We also mourn the loss of these relatives who have not been reunited with their Native families and communities. Importantly, many tribal nations are wary of the appropriation of Indian identity. So if you are not Native, avoid appropriating tribal cultures. For example, dressing in Native outfits on Halloween, or wearing Native items while cheering for Native-themed mascots in sports teams are harmful appropriations of Native cultures. Avoid jokes about tribal names, dwelling places, historical traumas, socioeconomic conditions, blood quantum, Indian princesses, or the use of stereotypes or Native-themed mascots. It's not helping. In many tribal cultures, speaking with care and having good thoughts is a core traditional value. Careless use of words and thoughts harm relationships. Further, such jokes are harmful to Native children who are cultivating their Native identities within the dominant American culture. We would like to share this value with you. Despite so many wrongdoings and ongoing unjust laws, Native people are now revitalizing languages and practices while contributing to every facet of modern American life, both within Indian country and beyond it. We are teachers, artists, lawyers, doctors, politicians, scientists, and more. We encourage and welcome respectful engagement with Indian country, especially in helping address current challenges, including addressing the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, or finally taking actions to meet treaty promises. Returning attention to the Northwest Band of Shoshone, as I said before, we reside in the territory of the Eastern Shoshone. That band office is in Wind River, Wyoming, and for perspective, the whole of Shoshone people have territories in regions as north as Canada, as south as Mexico, from the Midwest through Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. Shoshone language is a Numic language, the UUCO Aztecan varieties. If you recognize the name Aztec belonging to Mexico, then you can see just how large the greater community is. But to keep explaining the reasons simple for now, our church is closer to the boundaries of the Northwest Shoshone Band, and the tribal office is in nearby Brigham City. And as I learned today, the Northwest Band is a member of the Eastern Shoshone. Thank you for that clarification. One of Perry's key interests is in the preservation and recognition of the Bear River Massacre site. The site and its large membership in the Ogden Mormon Church and community makes Perry's voice relevant in Ogden. Perry's tribal history followed a different trajectory from many tribes in the United States. Please set aside your expectations and listen to the perspectives of our neighbor, Chairman Darian Perry.
It's an honor to be here. One day, as I just finished teaching a group of second graders about my culture, a little girl in the front row raised her hand. And she said, "How do you get to be the chief?" Because when the teacher introduced me earlier in the day, she introduced me as Chairman Perry. Well, if you can imagine, those second graders weren't very impressed by that. And then when I start my presentation, I say, what that really means is I'm the chief. And their eyes get big. And so she wanted to know how I got to be the chief. And I had to tell her I'm voted in today. But then I told her this story. When a young Shoshone boy or girl, hundreds of years ago, did an act of kindness or service for someone, the spiritual leader in the tribe would give that boy or girl an eagle feather, just one. And I said to this little girl, what if that boy or girl kept doing wonderful, nice things for people, serving people, being a good friend? What do you think would happen? And she said, oh, they would get more eagle feathers. I said, you're right. What if that boy or girl grew up to be an adult, but that whole time they kept doing wonderful things and serving? And she said, they would have so many eagle feathers. And I said, you know, the chief is always the chief until he dies. But the chief always knows about when that time is coming. And the chief will call everyone together. And he'll say to people, show me your eagle feathers. And it was the person that had the most eagle feathers would become the new chief. You see, the chief isn't always the toughest or the bravest or the one that killed the most white people. The chief is always the one who led a life of service for his people, was a good friend when they needed it. And so as I start today, I want you to figuratively go be a chief in your communities. Be that person. For thousands of years, tribal elders would sit down with the young children and tell them stories. The stories were always the same. There was never a word out of place. It had to be that way. It had to be accurate. Our children needed to hear the stories. Their elders had heard the stories. Because in our culture, nothing is ever written down. I went through the same process with my grandmother. Her name was May Timbimbu Perry. She was the most gentle woman that I'd ever met. She had black hair with deep creases in her skin that told of the life of a wonderful tribal elder who loved her people. She was our historian. She was our storyteller. She was the keeper of the sacred things. When she passed away a few years ago, it broke my heart. There's an old Indian saying that says, when an old Indian dies, a library burns. And that was never as true as it was about my grandmother. I remember she would sit for hours and tell me stories about how the coyotes sold fire, or how the sun got its name. And then with reverence in her tone and sometimes a tear in her eyes, she would relate the story of the massacre of Ogden, where more than 500 people of her people were massacred. As I grew older and attended school, I developed a great love for history because of her. And then I realized something one day, sitting in class. How come none of the stories that my grandmother told me are in her history books? I had always believed that events that transpired over time had one conclusion. But as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that history is about perspective. Whose perspective? And then one day it became clear to me as I read a quote attributed to Winston Churchill, and he said that history is always written by the victors. Well, that explains perfectly why Native American histories are never written. Many people have a mental snapshot of Native American people taken more than 200 years ago. And for some reason, we all want to retain that image in our mind. We may be approaching a time when everyday Americans want to become better Indians than Indians themselves. I believe that ancient tribal cultures have important lessons to teach the rest of the world about the interconnectedness of all living things, and the fact that our very existence is dependent upon the world that we seem to be destroying. Native people possess a profound spiritual kinship with nature. Pre-Columbus America was still our first Eden. Native people were transparent in this ecosphere. All of our decisions considered the effects of our actions for generations to come. I want you to know, though, that our languages are still strong. Ceremonies that we have been conducting since the beginning of time are still being held. Our governments are surviving, and most importantly, we continue to exist as a distinct group in the midst of the most powerful country in the world. We've had a history that has contributed significantly to not just the United States, but to the world. There are not that many Native Americans in the U.S. today, and we tend to get overlooked in many ways. And when we're not overlooked, we tend to get misrepresented. History on occasion has reduced my Native people to one-dimensional characters, important only in the sense that we taught the Pilgrims to grow corn. But we are much more than that. We long to be heard and recognized. Our voices have been quiet for a long time, and in some cases we are still searching for that identity. But we have much to contribute. My Shoshone people are indigenous to this land where you call home today. We lived like our forefathers lived for thousands of years. We were hunters, gatherers. We traveled with the changing seasons. We refer to ourselves as Niwa, which means the people. We looked upon the earth as not just a place to live, but something so sacred and special that we called her mother. She was always the provider of our livelihoods. You see, to my Native people, the mountains and the streams and the plains stand forever, and the seasons walk around annually. We traveled to different parts of this beautiful country when the game was plentiful and the seeds and berries were abundant. It was a hard way of life, if you can imagine. We were probably never more than a few days away from starvation. But it was a happy life. Every member of the tribe played an important role in its survival. That family relationship was sacred, as it should be to you and your family. The delicate balance in which the Shoshone people managed the land and water resources for thousands of years was drastically altered by colonization. This lack of understanding between two cultures and the shortage of resources caused conflict over the land, water, food. As a contemporary Shoshone man said, the Shoshone people welcomed the settlers and tried to be hospitable, but we really didn't realize what they had in mind. We retaliated when injustices were done to us, when our very survival was threatened, when our traditional way of life was made impossible. What else could we do? And then the events happened that would change the way our people lived forever. On the night of January 27th, in 1863, an old medicine man by the name of Tindup had a dream, and he foresaw the calamity which was about to take place. In his dream, he saw his people being killed by pony soldiers. He woke everyone up in the middle of the night and urged them to leave camp that night with him and his family. There were many who believed the dream of Tindup, and they moved and their lives were spared. 2 days later, on January 29th, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor and his troops from Camp Douglas, Utah, attacked the sleeping Indian village in the early morning hours of the day. By the time he was finished, between 400 and 500 of my people were massacred at the hands of civilization. This would become the largest massacre of Native Americans in the history of our country. Have you ever had a memory sneak out of your eye and roll down your cheek? I have that all the time when I think about the massacre of my people. My grandmother would tell me if you're there at just the right time in the evening, you can sit and you can hear the cries of the little ones crying for their mothers. You don't have to see things as they were to know that a terrible injustice had taken place. You can feel it. You see, history doesn't always affirm us. Sometimes history challenges us to think about an uglier past that we'd rather not have. But that's really the power and the benefit of history. It connects us to the past. It connects us to our humanity and our inhumanity. And it offers us a way to move forward. Sometimes not in the prettiest of ways, but the chance to move forward to a new relationship. There's a 21st century relationship based on respect. Respect for the truth and what happened in that past moment. Then, that is when you get the possibility for reconciliation. I want you to know that history isn't always neat and tidy. Sometimes history can be dark and hurtful, like the massacre of my people at Bo-Ogai, which means Big River. I've come to learn throughout my 60 years of life that bad things happen to us daily. How we respond to those events will determine our character. We as a tribal nation have chosen a different path. We have chosen to forgive. But that doesn't mean we need to forget. I have learned that as you forgive, you in no way change the past, but you sure can change the future. Take a look around you this morning. We are as varied and colorful as a beautiful field of wildflowers, each bringing with us our own individual traits and characteristics. As you look around, I hope you truly see each other and find the good in what you see. We need to be able to see each other through each other's eyes. When that happens, the possibilities for collaboration are endless. The Great Spirit's message is one of hope and love and inclusion. The second great commandment is to love our neighbors as ourselves. I think we do this when we speak medicine words to each other. Medicine words are words that bless, inspire, and empower. When we speak medicine words to each other, we build unity and love, and we strengthen those around us. As I close, let me just share a quick story about Thomas Begay. Old Thomas Begay was a Navajo code talker. A year ago, he was honored at the White House by the president for his service. Well, Thomas was there with his friends. The president made an offhanded remark about a certain senator, and he called her Pocahontas. It was out of turn, not needed. Thomas Begay left that meeting with his medal. He went to the airport to fly home to New Mexico. While he was at the airport, a young reporter noticed him and noticed that he'd been at this ceremony. To get the perfect story, he went up to Thomas Begay and said, "I want to know what you thought when the president referred to Senator Warren as Pocahontas," thinking that he was going to get a sensational story. Thomas Begay looked at him and said, "I wasn't offended. I was a little confused, but I'm not sure what he meant." Then the young reporter turned to walk away, not getting what he thought he was going to get, was grabbed by the arm by Thomas Begay. And Thomas Begay, with a smile, said, "Let me tell you something else. When I joined the Marines as a young man, and we learned to jump out of airplanes, the drill sergeant would make us yell, 'Geronimo,' every time we jumped out of the plane." And then with a smile, he told that young reporter, "I wasn't offended then either." My message is, let's choose not to be offended. In a world that screams to us every day from the media and the news outlets to be offended by something, let's maybe just choose to not be offended. Let's choose to love. I want to leave you with the Shoshone prayer, if you don't mind. O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, and whose breath gives all to the world, hear me. I come to you, one of your many children. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me talk in beauty and make my eyes even behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made, my ears to hear your voice. Make me wise so that one day I may know the things that you have taught my people, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. I seek strength, not to be superior to my brothers, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so that when life fades, as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame. Amen.